Chapter 1, Who did she sleep with? Late at night. The luxurious presidential suite was engulfed in deep darkness. On the large bed, the woman's sobs rose and fell, pitifully pleading for mercy. Yet, the man remained unmoved, showing no intention of letting her go. "You smell so good, you smell so good." He buried his head in her neck, inhaling her scent, whispering continuously in her ear, "So fragrant, why do you smell so good?" Indeed, she had a unique fragrance, a natural aroma that couldn't be erased. Today was her 19th birthday. Her younger sister and best friend organized a birthday party for her. She was very happy, had a drink, and perhaps due to her low tolerance, felt dizzy afterward. After seeing her sister and friends off, she went straight to her room to sleep. But somehow, when she woke up, she found herself pinned down by a stranger. By the time the man was satisfied, she had already fainted. When she opened her eyes again, she was still enveloped in darkness. It was the same room, the same large bed, with the man beside her sleeping soundly, his breath tickling her ear. She couldn't clearly see his features, only the vaguely perfect contours like a masterpiece sculpture. She had no idea how this happened, too scared to make a sound, not even daring to wake him to demand an explanation. Pushing his arm off her, she quietly slipped out of bed, dressed, and without hesitation, turned her back on the presidential suite and left. More than a month later, at a hospital. "Doctor, what did you say?" The doctor had to repeat his earlier words. "Miss Wood, you are pregnant." "Pregnant? She's pregnant." Rosewood felt as if she'd been struck by lightning, unable to believe what she had just heard. How could she be pregnant? It was just one night, and it was her first time. It should have been difficult to conceive. Moreover, she had no idea who the man that night was. That day, she had fled the hotel in panic, returning to her rented apartment. Everything at home was as usual, making her almost question if she had been sleepwalking. Drunk, she had fallen asleep, sneaked out, gone to a hotel, been with a stranger, and then returned home by herself. Rubbing her aching temples, Rosewood looked at the doctor and hesitantly said, I can't keep this baby." Hearing this, the doctor looked her over and sighed, "You don't seem like a careless girl, why don't you value yourself more? Young people these days." Rosewood blushed deeply. "No, this was just an accident." The doctor adjusted his glasses and looked at her with a cold expression. "When coming for an abortion, 8 or 9 out of 10 women say it was an accident. If you don't want a child, you should use contraception when enjoying yourself." Rosewood wanted to say that things weren't as the doctor thought. The doctor stood up, closed the door, and then sat down opposite her, his face serious. "Miss Wood, even though you don't want this baby, as a doctor, I must remind you. You cannot terminate this pregnancy." "Why?" Rosewood asked anxiously. The doctor explained, "Your physical condition is quite unique, your endometrium is much thinner than normal. Forcing an abortion could mean you might not be able to have children in the future. You need to think this through carefully." Hearing this, Rosewood felt her mind was in turmoil. "How can this be? It is true, Ms. Wood. You can take a few days to think it over before making a decision." The doctor reminded her, "This decision affects a woman's entire life, so please choose carefully." Chapter 2, Causing a commotion at the engagement party 5 years later. The roads surrounding the spherical building in City T were severely congested as famous stars, entertainment media, and business moguls gathered there. Today marks the engagement of young Master Ethan Miller of the Miller family to the daughter of an electronics tycoon, truly an unprecedented grand event. At this moment, on the 88th floor of the building, guests were adorned in splendid evening attire. Melodious music, exquisite champagne, and vibrant fresh flowers added to the romantic ambience of the engagement party. As the couple entered, all eyes turned towards them. Ethan Miller wore a high-end silver gray suit, his nearly 1.9-meter tall stature exuding majesty and charisma. His sharp eyes, straight nose, perfectly proportioned lips, and chiseled features seemed sculpted, while his thick eyebrows highlighted his cold, arrogant demeanor. At this moment, his jet-black eyes gleamed with unfathomable depth. He was a prodigy, with a handsome appearance, hailing from a renowned medical family, and was acclaimed as a genius in both medicine and business. His skillful hands could both save and take lives. It was rumored that he was specially admitted to a top world university at 14, graduated as valedictorian at 16, founded an entertainment company at 18, purchased a top 10 world island with personal wealth at 20, and officially took over the Miller family's medical empire at 21. "Miss, you don't have an invitation, you can't enter." "Let me in, I want to go in." "Mr. Miller, Ethan Miller, I must see him. Please let me in." The peaceful atmosphere of the hall was suddenly disrupted by the desperate pleas of a woman. The guests turned to see a woman wielding a sharp fruit knife rushing in. Rosewood wore jeans, a simple t-shirt, and inexpensive yet clean sneakers. She had a delicate face, porcelain white skin, and long, glossy black hair tied loosely with a string. At this moment, a noble-looking woman, bearing some resemblance to Ethan Miller, stepped forward. It was Mrs. Celeste, his mother. "What is happening?" "Madam, this woman wants to meet the young master but doesn't have an invitation, so we stopped her. She threatened us with her life, so..." On a regular day, the security would have subdued Rosewood without caring about her well-being. But today is special, with many reporters present, any incident could tarnish the Miller family's reputation. "Useless fools," Mrs. Celeste scolded the guards to step back. She looked at Rosewood and asked, "Who are you?" Rosewood appeared panicked, seemingly not hearing Mrs. Celeste's question. Her beautiful eyes scanned the hall, searching for the figure she wanted to meet. Suddenly, her eyes lit up. The man standing in the center of the hall, exuding an aura of arrogance, was looking at her sharply. He was the one she was looking for, Ethan Miller. Before arriving, she had researched him thoroughly, so there was no mistaking his appearance. Rosewood, filled with excitement, stepped forward, wanting to get closer to him but was stopped. She looked pleadingly at the person blocking her. "Please, I want to see Mr. Miller." "It won't take long, just give me 10 minutes, only 10 minutes." As soon as she finished speaking, the guards took advantage of her distraction and tightened their grip on her wrist. She cried out in pain, her hand loosening, and with a clang, the knife fell to the ground. Immediately, she was seized and dragged out of the hall. She cried and struggled, but it was futile. In her desperation, she could only look towards Ethan Miller and scream, "Mr. Miller! Mr. Miller!" The guests at the party witnessed the chaotic scene, some curious, others secretly mocking. Most assumed this woman must be one of the many women Ethan Miller had entangled with. "Wait!" Just as Rosewood was being dragged out, Ethan Miller's deep and authoritative voice rang out. The guards had no choice but to bring Rosewood back. Seeing the situation change, Rosewood hurriedly seized the opportunity, looking directly at Ethan Miller, saying, "Mr. Miller, I have something to discuss with you. Please give me 10 minutes. Then she implored, "Please." The event seemed to grow more intriguing, and everyone watched intently. Ethan Miller gently pushed aside his fiancée, who was leaning against him, and slowly walked towards Rosewood. Rosewood quietly watched him approach. Up close, this man was astonishingly handsome, even more so than in magazine photos. "Mr. Miller." Ethan Miller raised his hand slightly, signaling the guards to release her. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he pulled Rosewood into his arms, and without a word, kissed her on the lips. Rosewood's eyes widened, her body stiff as a statue. It took her several seconds to regain her composure and struggle, but his hold was too tight for her to break free. She frowned but dared not show anger because she needed his help. Electronics mogul Edward Wright, standing nearby, turned pale with rage and slammed the table in anger. Ethan Miller's recent action was like a slap in the face to him and his daughter, causing the Wright family to lose all dignity. Soon after, Ethan Miller released Rosewood. Having been kissed to the point of weakness, she leaned against his chest, needing his support to stand firm. To outsiders, their posture clearly exuded intense affection. "You know you don't want me to get engaged. We'll talk at home." The man's deep, seductive voice whispered in her ear. Rosewood looked up, meeting Ethan Miller's calm gaze. What? What did he mean by that? Since when did she not want him to get engaged? She came to cause trouble, not to stop his wedding. Around them, gasps of surprise echoed. Numerous reporters at the scene raised their cameras, flashes going off incessantly, all aimed at Ethan Miller and Rosewood. Rosewood looked bewildered, her mind blank. Edward Wright pulled his daughter back, angrily pointed at Ethan Miller, then snorted coldly and left. In the enclosed car, Rosewood nervously wrung her hands, glancing at the silent man beside her. After a long pause, she took a deep breath and finally spoke, "Mr. Miller, However, before she could finish, Ethan Miller interrupted, "You acted very well." "What? Acted very well?" Rosewood guessed there was some misunderstanding and quickly explained, "I wasn't acting, Mr. Miller." "Stop the car." Ethan Miller ordered the driver, cutting her off again, then turned to her, signaling her to get out. "You've completed your task, now leave." In desperation, Rosewood quickly grabbed his arm. "I don't know anything about a task, Mr. Miller, please listen to me." Ethan Miller coldly looked at the hand clutching him and forcefully shook her off. "Get this woman out." The bodyguard in the front seat heard this, immediately got out, opened the back door, and pulled Rosewood out. Rosewood clung to the car door, pleading, "Mr. Miller, I beg you, save my daughter, save my daughter." Chapter 4, She is a surprise. Upon hearing this, Ethan Miller scrutinized Rosewood. "Save your daughter?" Rosewood nodded anxiously, "Yes, save my daughter. She has a congenital heart condition and can only have a heart transplant if a suitable heart is found." Almost everyone in Country S knows that the Miller bloodline possesses the most advanced medical equipment in the world along with a vast information resource network. As long as Ethan Miller agrees to help, she could quickly find a suitable heart and have Lily operated on with the best equipment available. Most importantly, she hoped Ethan Miller could perform the surgery on Lily himself. Faced with her plea, Ethan Miller narrowed his eyes and coldly said, "What makes you think I would agree to your request?" Rosewood closed her eyes, trying to hold back her emotions, but tears continued to fall. Her lips trembled, and in front of the driver and bodyguard, she slowly knelt down. "Please, sir, save my daughter. She's only 5 years old, her life is just beginning." Rosewood choked out. Back then, despite the doctor's advice, she decided to have the child. During the 10 months of pregnancy, feeling the little life growing inside her, she experienced the happiness of a mother for the first time. She was an orphan, and after her adoptive father passed away, her adoptive mother treated her coldly, not even wanting her sister to associate with her. Her loneliness finally ended when that small life was born. Like any other mother, she loved her child unconditionally, willing to sacrifice everything for her. Yet, her Lily was born with a congenital heart condition. "Please, please," she continuously begged, hoping Ethan Miller would give her a glimmer of hope. But there was none. The man only looked at her coldly, without a hint of warmth. Only impatience. "Drive. Mr. Miller, don't go, please, don't go, Mr. Miller." Rosewood pounded on the car window, but the car drove past her and eventually disappeared from sight. Ethan Miller's face was dark as he reached into his pocket for his phone, only to find it wasn't there. He then remembered he hadn't brought it with him. "Call Henry Smith." The bodyguard quickly dialed Henry Smith's number and handed the phone to Ethan Miller. As soon as Ethan Miller took the phone, he heard a "hello" from the other end. He asked, who was the woman at the venue earlier? On the other end, Henry Smith shrugged with a laugh. "That was an unexpected incident. Believe me, the person I was looking for hadn't even appeared before she showed up. But she caused such a scene, it seemed to suit you, didn't it? So, she wasn't someone you arranged?" No. Ethan Miller frowned. "I see." With that, he hung up. Huinhai Manor is the largest private estate in City T, with each villa here worth at least 200 million yuan or more. The car entered Miller Manor, drove along the cobblestone path for a while, circled the fountain, and finally stopped in front of the main gate. The bodyguard opened the car door, respectfully inviting Ethan Miller to step out. As soon as he stepped into the hall, Ethan Miller saw Mrs. Celeste sitting on the sofa. Seeing him return, Mrs. Celeste angrily said, "Ethan, this time you've gone too far." Ethan Miller casually removed his coat, which his servant quickly took. He looked at his mother and said, "You must know, I have never liked others arranging my marriage. Without my consent, you announced the engagement news to the media, so I had no choice but to play along." Mrs. Celeste was speechless with anger. Who was that girl earlier? Just an unexpected incident. Ethan Miller didn't want to dwell on it. Ignoring Mrs. Celeste calling after him, he went straight upstairs. Chapter 5, determined to meet him at any cost. T-City Heighton Hospital. "Mom, I want to eat an apple," said the little girl with naturally curly brown hair cascading down her back. Her large, star-like eyes blinked as she looked at her mother. Rosewood affectionately pinched her daughter's small, fair face. "You little fruity. When I went out earlier, did you behave and listen to Aunt Violet?" The girl pouted, puffing her cheeks adorably. "Yes, Lily was very good." Violet Evans, standing nearby, handed Rosewood an apple and winked playfully at Lily. "That's right, Lily was very obedient." Rosewood took the apple and carefully peeled it with a fruit knife. Once peeled, she cut the apple into 8 crescent-shaped slices. Handing a slice to Lily, she said, "Here, eat your fruit and then go to sleep." Lily took the apple slice, bit into it, and giggled. "I know." After chewing twice, the little girl asked, "Mom, when can we go home? I don't want to stay in the hospital anymore." Hearing this, Rosewood frowned slightly. Violet Evans patted her shoulder and turned to smile at Lily. "Rest for one more night, and we'll go home tomorrow." Lily's eyes lit up. "Really?" "Yes, really." Excited about going home the next day, Lily quickly finished her apple slice and lay down on the hospital bed. "Mom, Aunt, I'm going to sleep now." Rosewood gave a resigned smile. Soon after, Lilywood fell asleep, and Rosewood and Violet Evans quietly left the hospital room. "So, did you meet Ethan Miller today?" "Yes." Violet Evans asked excitedly, "You did?" "I did, but..." Rosewood recounted the entire incident. "No way." Violet Evans' eyes widened. "Did you ruin his engagement ceremony?" "It wasn't me who ruined it." Speaking of which, Ethan Miller had inexplicably kissed her, that was her second kiss, and she hadn't even confronted him about it yet. "I think he didn't want to get engaged in the first place." Violet Evans rested her chin on her hand, her beautiful eyes narrowing slightly. "But he won't help you, so what will you do now?" This was exactly what troubled Rosewood. "I'll just have to find a way to meet him and talk to him again." Thinking about the need to cure Lily, her eyes grew determined. "No matter what, I won't give up." At this moment, Rosewood had only one belief: she must persuade Ethan Miller to help Lily with the surgery. In the private parking lot of the Global building, Rosewood stood not far from the exit, enduring the scorching sun and anxiously waiting. From what she had learned, whenever Ethan Miller came to the company, his car would be parked in this lot. Without an appointment and given the vast difference in their statuses, she couldn't meet him through legitimate means. After careful consideration, she decided to wait here to intercept his car. Though it was already late afternoon, the sweltering heat of a summer's day at 3 o'clock still baked the ground after a long day under the sun, making her throat dry. "I should have brought a bottle of water," she thought, contemplating buying some but feared Ethan Miller might leave during her absence. Glancing at her watch, she grew even more anxious. Why hasn't he come out yet? Maybe he's not coming today? Just as she finished speaking, a car slowly approached, making her heart race. The security guard at the booth quickly raised the barrier upon seeing the vehicle. The car drew closer. Clenching her fists, she timed her move perfectly as the car neared, closing her eyes and spreading her arms as she dashed forward. Screech! The sudden sound of tires skidding on the road echoed. She opened her eyes, ignoring her pounding heart, and quickly stepped towards the car. As she reached the door, it opened, and the bodyguard and driver got out to block her path. "Who are you?" Rosewood peered through the car window but saw nothing inside. "Is Mr. Miller in the car?" "I want to see him." The bodyguard barked harshly. "Mr. Miller isn't someone you can just meet. Leave now, or don't blame me for being rude." Ignoring him, Rosewood stared intently at the car window. "Mr. Miller, please save my daughter, save my daughter. I'm begging you." At that moment, the car window slowly rolled down, revealing Ethan Miller's cold face. He looked at Rosewood and said icily, "It's you again." "Mr. Miller, I know this isn't right, but I truly have no other choice. This is the only way I could meet you." Ethan Miller, losing patience, interrupted her and ordered the bodyguard, "Take her away." "No, please, I'm begging you, have mercy, save my daughter." Rosewood had waited for 2 or 3 hours, exhausted, but Ethan Miller gave her no hope, leaving her in despair. In desperation, she bit the bodyguard's hand. Instinctively, the bodyguard pushed her away with too much force, causing her to fall to the ground. Ugh! Rosewood braced herself with her hands on the ground, scratching her delicate skin, but she paid no mind to the pain. As she tried to stand up, dizziness overwhelmed her, her vision blurred, and it took several seconds before she could see clearly again. She struggled to her feet, trying to approach Ethan Miller once more, but was stopped by the bodyguard. "Mr. Miller, Miller!" She called out loudly, managing a few words before everything went dark, and she collapsed. The bodyguard quickly caught her, turning to look at Ethan Miller sitting in the car, awaiting instructions. Just then, two photographers appeared out of nowhere, cameras in hand, making Ethan Miller's expression darken. He signaled with his chin and instructed the bodyguard, "Get in the car." The bodyguard carried Rosewood into the car and quickly followed her inside. So cool. So comfortable. The stifling heat that had engulfed her was replaced by a refreshing coolness. Rosewood frowned slightly and slowly opened her eyes. She was disoriented for a moment before realizing she was in the car, with Ethan Miller sitting right beside her. Startled, she exclaimed, "Mr. Miller. Strange, how did I end up in the car?" She thought back. "Oh, right, I must have fainted. Probably because I haven't been eating or sleeping well these days, and being out in the sun didn't help either." Seeing her awake, Ethan Miller signaled the driver to pull over. Rosewood quickly held her head. "Sorry, I still feel very unwell, dizzy. Could I stay in the car a little longer?" Ethan Miller saw through her foolish act with a glance. He turned a page of the document in his hand and said, "Get out of the car, and don't come looking for me again." Hearing this, Rosewood stared at him, biting her lower lip, fists clenched at her sides. When she didn't move, Ethan Miller reminded her once more, "Don't make me repeat myself." As he spoke, he glanced at the document, completely ignoring Rosewood. Somehow, Rosewood found the courage to snatch the document from his hand. Ethan Miller, perhaps not expecting her to do so, allowed her to succeed. He looked at her displeased, and she said, "Mr. Miller, it might be rude of me to say this, but I must." He raised an eyebrow, a sign known to those familiar with him as a prelude to his anger. Chapter 7, A Face and Figure Not Bad. "I know you're skilled in medicine and come from a family of doctors, but why do you lack the compassion of a healer? My daughter isn't even 5 years old. She should have a long, beautiful life ahead of her, but fate didn't grant her a healthy body." As she spoke, she threw the document at him in frustration. "Don't you have any empathy? Watching a woman beg so desperately without even batting an eye, are you cold-blooded or?" Before she could finish, her voice abruptly stopped. Ethan Miller unexpectedly grabbed her throat, his face cold with a mocking smile. "Before seeking me out, you should have learned about me. You probably don't know that these hands of mine don't like saving people, only killing them." Rosewood stared wide-eyed at the man so close to her, a chilling sensation creeping through her bones. She looked directly into his deep, dark eyes, which reflected her frightened face. Suppressing her fear, she pushed him away. "If you refuse, I'll keep pestering you until you agree." Upon hearing this, he narrowed his eyes. This woman was bolder than he had imagined. He released her, letting out a disdainful snort. Ethan Miller asked, "If you want me to save your daughter, what are you willing to exchange with me?" "Exchange?" Rosewood immediately became alert. "As long as you save my daughter, I'll do anything you ask." She quickly added, "But I don't have any money." At 19, she decided to have Lily. That year, she was just in her second year of college and had to drop out, renting an old house from Violet Evans. Later, Violet's parents divorced, and she went with her father to Country A. Not wanting to leave her alone in Country S to give birth, they took her along to Country A. She gave birth to Lily smoothly, juggling childcare and work, but life was tough. Without Violet Evans' help, she would have collapsed long ago. Ethan Miller said calmly, "I don't need money." "Oh, really?" Rosewood showed a pained expression. While it was good that Ethan didn't want money, what did he want then? In terms of status, family background, and reputation, she couldn't compare to him. Thinking it over, she realized she had no right to negotiate with him. While she was lost in thought, his gaze shifted from her face to her chest, then further down. After observing for a moment, he said, "Your looks and figure aren't bad, but I don't lack women." However, recalling yesterday's kiss, it was quite pleasant. "Huh?" Rosewood exclaimed in confusion, then realized his blatant gaze. She quickly covered her chest and angrily said, "Don't even think about it." Is this the attitude of someone asking for help? He withdrew his gaze. "Besides, do you know what I'm thinking?" Rosewood blushed with embarrassment. "Of course I know what you're thinking." A man looking at a woman's body with such a blatant gaze could only be thinking about one thing. "What am I thinking?" Ethan Miller leaned back in his chair, legs crossed elegantly, casually waiting for her answer. Rosewood bit her lip, turned away, and didn't respond. Ethan Miller, not wanting to waste any more time, signaled for the bodyguard to escort Rosewood out of the car. In a moment of desperation, Rosewood quickly interjected, "I can come to your house to work as a maid, do laundry, make tea, cook, clean the house. I'm very good at it." "I don't need a maid." His words shattered her illusions. Immediately after, she was dragged out of the car. Taking advantage of the moment before the car drove off, she pointed at the window and shouted to the person inside, "I won't give up." Chapter 8, Relentless Pursuit. Rosewood returned home and used her key to open the door. As soon as she stepped into the hall, she saw Violet Evans and Lilywood playing a complex puzzle game in the living room. Seeing her mother return, Lily immediately dropped her toy and ran to hug her leg. "Mommy!" Rosewood bent down to pick up her daughter and walked over to Violet Evans. Seeing her friend staring intently at the puzzle, Rosewood curiously asked, "What are you looking at?" Violet Evans looked up and pointed at the puzzle. "Rosewood, once again, I'm amazed by Lily's IQ. This puzzle maze took us a whole day to complete before, but Lily just looked at the instructions a few times and finished it in 10 minutes. Hearing this, Rosewood calmly replied, "That's not surprising." She had long known how high Lily's IQ was. Back in Country A, Lily participated in an international children's memory competition. Hundreds of numbers, and she recited them in order after just a few minutes of looking. At that time, they won a $5,000 prize, which Rosewood used to cover living expenses. Since then, whenever there was a similar competition, she would let Lily participate. Every time it was a contest of intelligence, Lily would win first place, and the prize money helped alleviate many financial burdens. Sigh, thinking about it made her feel like a failed mother. "Mommy, you said I would meet Daddy after coming back from the hospital?" Lily pouted, looking at Rosewood with dissatisfaction. "You always lie to me. You said I'd meet Daddy after leaving the hospital, but every time I leave, he's never there." Rosewood coughed softly. For the past 2 years, this little girl had been constantly asking for her father, but how could she know who the man from back then was, let alone find a father for her? Lily, Daddy will appear soon, but you have to be good and listen, or he won't come back. I'm good, Mommy, I'm very good. Lily hugged her tightly, showering her face with kisses, leaving it covered in saliva. Rosewood wiped her face, put Lily down, and turned to head into the kitchen. Violet Evans followed. I've already cooked dinner. Rosewood inhaled the aroma of the food, feeling a warm sensation rise in her heart. After the three finished their meal, Rosewood bathed Lily and put her to sleep before quietly leaving the bedroom. In the living room, Violet Evans was sitting on the sofa hugging a pillow, watching TV. When she saw Rose, she waved enthusiastically, "Rosewood, come watch TV with me." Rose glanced at the screen just as Ethan Miller's face appeared. This scene was... It seemed to be Ethan Miller's engagement ceremony. "These journalists are really nosy," Violet Evans commented, though she watched with great interest. She took a bite of an apple and suddenly jumped up from the sofa, exclaiming, "Rosewood, isn't that you? They even got you in the shot." Rose was even more shocked than Violet Evans, completely unprepared to see herself on TV, especially caught up in such a scandal. She hurried over to turn off the TV. "No, don't watch it." If she remembered correctly, the next scene would be Ethan Miller pulling her into his arms and kissing her in front of everyone. "Huh? Don't turn it off, I'm watching." "Wait. Ah. Rosewood, Rosewood, he kissed you." Before Rose could turn off the TV, the scene she dreaded appeared, showing a close-up of her and Ethan Miller's kiss. Watching the detailed shot, she felt her expression at that moment was truly silly. Chapter 9, Is This Child Ethan Miller's? At that moment, she heard the host say, "Although the engagement ceremony ended in quite a commotion, it shows the charm of our CEO Miller is undeniable. Not only does he have a wealthy heiress willing to marry him, but also a beauty fighting for his affection, causing a stir at the engagement, making many singles envious." Rosewood was completely dumbfounded after hearing this. Fighting for affection? These people really knew how to imagine things. She abruptly turned off the TV and met Violet Evans' teasing, slightly gloating gaze. She immediately raised her hands in surrender. "I admit, he did kiss me, but it was just an accident." Calling it an accident, but clearly Ethan Miller had forced the kiss on her, she was the victim here, wasn't she? Violet Evans grabbed her arm, curiously asking, how did it feel to be kissed by him? "He's super handsome." Rosewood glared at her. "If you want to know how it feels, go find him and ask him to kiss you." Violet Evans covered her face, pretending to be shy. "I wouldn't do that, my first kiss is reserved for my future husband." Rosewood couldn't take it anymore and turned away to go into the bathroom. Tomorrow, she would have to continue dealing with Ethan Miller. Rosewood stood outside in the parking lot, holding an umbrella, looking up at the torrential rain, enduring the strong winds, and sighed. Yesterday she was under the sun, today she's drenched in rain. The heavens were truly not sparing her. Despite the umbrella, her shoes and the hem of her pants were soaked. She kept glancing towards the entrance, hoping Ethan Miller would appear soon. Fortunately, she didn't have to wait long. A car drove out, and as soon as she saw it was Ethan Miller's, she ran towards it. Because of the rain, the driver didn't dare to drive fast and quickly braked when he saw someone rushing out. Seeing Rosewood through the windshield, he turned back to Ethan Miller and said, "Sir, it's her again." Hearing this, Ethan Miller looked up outside. The rain blurred the car windows, and he could only vaguely see a slender figure approaching. Henry Smith, sitting beside him, didn't understand what was happening and turned to ask, Who is she? At that moment, there was a knock on the car window. Henry Smith glanced over and immediately recognized Rosewood. He squinted his charming eyes, elegantly stroked his shoulder-length hair, and teased, "Miller, she's your rumored lover now." "What? Planning to make it real?" "Shut up." This woman was like a persistent ghost, refusing to leave. Henry Smith clicked his tongue twice, hearing Ethan Miller tell the driver, "Drive on, ignore her." The car drove straight past Rosewood. "Don't go, Mr. Miller, Ethan Miller." Rosewood, ignoring her soaked clothes, chased after the car. Suddenly, a few paparazzi appeared out of nowhere and blocked her path. Rosewood was stunned, still not understanding what was happening when a barrage of questions hit her. "Miss, are you Ethan Miller's lover? Did he break off his engagement with the electronics tycoon's daughter because he truly loves you? Break off the engagement because of her? Truly love?" Such ridiculous questions, don't they feel their IQ being insulted? These people surely didn't see how Ethan Miller's car just sped past her. If she were Ethan Miller's lover, would he treat her like that? Think before you ask. "Ms. Wood, can you tell us how you and Ethan Miller met?" Rosewood caught the key point and turned to the reporter who asked, "How do you know my last name is Wood? How did they investigate her background so quickly?" "The information I have suggests that you currently have a daughter, but you've never been married. Is that child Ethan Miller's?" Chapter 10, Is Daddy handsome? Is he rich? Rosewood hadn't even processed the previous question when another bombshell hit her. At that moment, her phone rang in her pocket. She took it out and saw it was Violet Evans calling, so she answered immediately. On the other end, Violet Evans' voice was filled with concern. "Rosewood, what's going on? Why are there so many entertainment reporters outside the neighborhood? They blocked Lily and me, kept asking about your relationship with Ethan Miller, and said Lily is his daughter." "What?" Rosewood was completely stunned. Through the phone, she heard a reporter asking Violet Evans, "Is this child Ethan Miller's illegitimate daughter? Is he her father?" Hearing this question, Rosewood was so anxious she wanted to jump through the phone and get there immediately. "Wait there, I'll be right back." Just as she was about to hang up, she heard her daughter's clear, sweet voice coming through the phone. Lilywood opened her bright, sparkling eyes, looked at the reporters with an excited face, and smiled sweetly. "Uncle, who did you say is my daddy? Has my daddy come back?" Rosewood was truly at a loss with her daughter, who was always searching for her father. She decisively hung up and put the phone back in her pocket. "Get out of the way. I have no relationship with him. This child is not his." Beep beep, the urgent sound of a car horn rang out. Rosewood turned her head to see a car slowly approaching her. The driver looked at her and said, "Miss, please get in the car." "You are?" The driver explained, "Mr. Miller asked me to pick you up." Although she found it strange, to escape the reporters, Rosewood quickly opened the car door and got in. The reporters chased after them for a few steps but eventually gave up. In the car, she curiously asked the driver, "Did Mr. Miller really ask you to pick me up? Hadn't that man already left?" The driver nodded. Rosewood hesitated a bit, feeling slightly embarrassed, and said, I urgently need to get home, and it's hard to catch a cab in this heavy rain. Could you please give me a ride?" The driver responded shortly, "Please provide the address." Rosewood gave the address, and the driver sped up, heading toward the apartment complex where she and Violet Evans lived. Ethan Miller watched the car disappear into the distance, frowning slightly. These reporters are as persistent as leeches, Henry Smith said, looking at Ethan Miller. Do you want me to put pressure on their superiors to remove this rumor? Ethan Miller pondered for a moment, then gently shook his head. I have my own plans. Thank you for driving me home. You're welcome. Rosewood opened the car door and stepped out. By now, the rain had subsided. She walked to the entrance of the apartment complex and, not seeing Violet Evans and Lily, quickly took out her phone to call Violet Evans. Violet, have you two made it home? Yes, I asked the security to chase away those reporters. Hearing this, Rosewood sighed in relief. At that moment, Lilywood suddenly grabbed the phone from Violet Evans and asked, Mom, is Dad back? Earlier, someone said I'm Dad's daughter. Who is my dad? As Rosewood walked home, she rubbed her forehead. Soon, your dad will be back soon. Rosewood didn't want to lie, but she was terrified of hearing Lily's disappointed voice, seeing her disappointed face. Every child needs a father, and no matter how smart Lily was, she was still a child, still yearning for a father's love. Sure enough, Lilywood was very excited. Really? Wow, Dad's coming back soon, I'll get to meet him. Mom, is Dad handsome? Is he rich? Does he like us? Faced with her daughter's series of eager questions, Rosewood could only reply, very handsome, very rich, and he likes us a lot. Chapter 11, A Father Forgets the Mother. Lilywood joyfully tossed the phone aside, climbed onto the sofa, and bounced around as if playing on a trampoline. As she jumped, she exclaimed, Wow, wow, Lily has a dad now. When Rosewood got home, Lily was still brimming with excitement. She helplessly glanced at her daughter before heading into the kitchen to cook. Violet Evans followed her into the kitchen to help, and the two chatted while picking vegetables. I didn't expect those paparazzi to be so effective. They quickly found out about you? I didn't expect it either. She had no intention of disrupting Ethan Miller's engagement ceremony, let alone expect him to kiss her in front of everyone, nor did she think the reporters would make such a fuss about it. The most unbelievable thing was that they assumed Lily was Ethan Miller's child. It was utterly absurd. She was the child's mother, yet she didn't even know who the father was. Actually, there's nothing to be proud of in this situation. What should we do now? I don't think they'll easily let you and your daughter go. Rosewood, feeling troubled, frowned and said, I don't know either. But right now, I don't want to think too much. I just hope Ethan Miller agrees to treat Lily. I can't believe that man is so cold-hearted, refusing to help even a child. Hearing this, Rosewood paused for a moment, then continued, No matter what, I must make him agree to save Lily. I absolutely won't let her be taken away from me. After saying that, she turned to look towards the living room. In the living room, Lilywood was wearing a pink dress, standing on the sofa, watching TV and singing along to an English song. Lily. Ding dong. Ding dong. Bang bang bang. Early in the morning, while Rosewood was preparing breakfast in the kitchen, she heard urgent knocking at the door. Lilywood, who was playing in the living room, immediately ran to the door. Mom, I'll get it. Hey Lily, don't open the door for strangers. Before she could finish, Lily had already opened the door, leaving Rosewood speechless. She hurried over, shielding Lily behind her, and stared at three tall, muscular men in black suits and sunglasses at the door. Who are you? The man in the middle glanced at her and Lily, speaking formally, Ms. Wood? Mr. Miller invites you. She was startled. Ethan Miller? Please come with us. Rosewood quickly took off her apron. Okay, give me a moment. I'll go with you right away. Although she didn't know why Ethan Miller suddenly sought her out, since he took the initiative to find her, it surely wasn't anything bad. At that moment, Violet Evans came out of the bathroom, saw the situation, and quickly asked, "What's going on?" Rosewood pushed Lily towards Violet Evans. "I don't know, Ethan Miller is looking for me. I'll be back soon." "Huh? Oh, okay." Rosewood grabbed her handbag from the coffee table, headed to the door, and said to the men sent by Ethan Miller, "Let's go." Unexpectedly, one of them said, "We also need your daughter to come with us." "My daughter has to go too?" Rosewood was even more puzzled. Could it be Ethan Miller has agreed to treat Lily? Thinking of this, Rosewood was overjoyed, hurriedly waving her hand to signal Lily to follow. Lily obediently came to her side, looking up with a mix of innocence and excitement, asking, "Mom, is Dad back? Am I finally going to meet Dad?" Rosewood showed an awkward expression. "Ahem, no, it's not your dad." Lily giggled, "Hee, I don't believe you. It must be to meet Dad." Then she stepped forward, grabbing the pant leg of a man. "Mister, let's go quickly." Rosewood's face instantly turned beet red. She really wanted to tell Lily, "My dear daughter, can you be a bit more mindful? How could Ethan Miller possibly be your dad? Moreover, with your behavior, it's clear you wanted Dad so much that you're forgetting about your mom." Chapter 12, Dad is indeed handsome and wealthy. Rosewood sat in the car, watching as it drove into the villa area, suddenly feeling a bit tense. Beside her, Lilywood remained excited, her tiny hands pressed against the car window, admiring the scenery outside. The little girl chirped, "Mom, this place is so big and beautiful. Does Dad live here?" Rosewood pulled her back and reminded her once more, "I told you, it's not your dad." Lily huffed, turning her face away, ignoring her mother. The car stopped at the main gate, and a bodyguard got out to open the door. "Miss Wood, please step out of the car." Rosewood held Lily's hand as they got out. At that moment, a middle-aged man, around 50 years old, approached them. "Miss Wood, please follow me." Rosewood nodded and followed him with Lily in tow. Ethan Miller was sitting leisurely on the sofa in the living room, holding a newspaper, his head lowered, engrossed in reading. From Rosewood's angle, his chiseled features exuded an air of arrogance and handsomeness. The butler walked up to him and said, "Young master, Miss Wood has arrived." Ethan Miller finally raised his head to glance at Rosewood, his eyes briefly sweeping over Lily standing beside her, before setting the newspaper down. Rosewood timidly stepped forward, intending to greet him, but before she could, Lily suddenly let go of her hand and dashed toward Ethan Miller. Before he could react, the little girl threw herself into his arms, sweetly calling out, "Daddy!" Rosewood immediately lowered her head, covering her face with her hand. How embarrassing! It seemed her daughter really missed having a father to the point of obsession. Ethan Miller frowned, looking down at the little girl clinging to him. Known for his decisive actions, he surprisingly didn't push her away immediately. Rosewood hurried over, grabbing Lilywood's shirt to pull her back, but Lily clung tightly to Ethan Miller, resisting Rose's efforts. "Daddy, Daddy, Lily finally met you," Lilywood said excitedly, drooling on Ethan Miller. "Mom said you're very handsome and rich," and she wasn't lying to Lily. Hearing this, Ethan Miller glanced at Rosewood and pulled Lilywood away from him, his voice cold, "I'm not your father." Lilywood wasn't angry. She clung to him again, whining, "You are my daddy." Ethan Miller looked at the little girl's innocent face, strangely not pushing her away again. He stood up and handed a newspaper to Rosewood. Rosewood took it, puzzled, and looked down. It was today's latest morning paper. She immediately noticed the headline on the entertainment news page and froze in place. This. The sensational headline read clearly, "Genius Ethan Miller has an illegitimate child." Below was a short paragraph with a photo of Lilywood. "Oh my God." She looked up into Ethan Miller's cold eyes and explained, "I didn't expect things to turn out like this." All right, she admitted, she shouldn't have caused a scene at his engagement party. But ultimately, the reporters misunderstood their relationship because of him. Who told him to kiss her in front of so many people? So, was she really wrong? While Rosewood was still tangled in thoughts of right and wrong, Ethan Miller suddenly said, "You owe me a fiancé. How will you repay this debt?" Huh? What? She looked at him, bewildered. Owe him a fiancé? What did that mean? She retorted, "It's not entirely my fault. You didn't care about my wishes and kissed me, leading everyone to misunderstand, then investigate me, and finally mistake Lily as your daughter." She spoke at length, but he seemed not to hear, deciding on his own, "Since you owe me a fiancé, you'll compensate for it." Chapter 13, Moving in Together, a stand-in? Rosewood almost thought she misheard. To make sure she understood correctly, she asked, "What do you mean?" Ethan Miller stated plainly, "From today onwards, to the outside world, you are my fiancé." Rosewood was stunned, taking a few seconds before responding, "Why? Why deceive everyone?" "I have my reasons, which you don't need to know," he said curtly. "I don't agree." She firmly refused. Ethan Miller frowned at her, then gave a cold smile, "You don't have a choice." Then he looked down at Lilywood clinging to his pant leg and continued, "If you cooperate obediently, maybe I'll consider helping your daughter." This condition made Rosewood unable to resist feeling moved. At this moment, nothing was more important to her than Lily's life. She bit her lip and agreed, "All right, I agree." This outcome was within Ethan Miller's expectations. He casually glanced at his watch and simply said, "Quickly move both of your belongings here." This statement struck Rosewood like a bolt of lightning. "You want me to live with you?" He frowned, looking impatient, as if to say, "What's the problem?" Rosewood immediately set a condition, "Living together is fine, but I have conditions." He squinted, seeing through her thoughts, and mocked, "Rest assured, I'm not interested in your body." Rosewood didn't expect him to be so blunt, and her face turned red immediately. But if he wasn't interested in her body, she felt relieved. After speaking, Ethan Miller strode out. "Daddy, where are you going?" Lilywood tried to follow him but was held back by Rosewood. "Lily, stay here with Mommy. People often say that when daughters get married, they become like water thrown away." She hadn't believed it before, but now she truly did. Her little one hadn't even married yet, and just meeting a stranger made her forget her mother, which was disheartening. Seeing Ethan Miller leave, Rosewood sat down, intending to teach Lilywood a lesson. "You behaved very badly today, do you know that?" Lilywood pouted and shook her head vigorously. Rosewood said helplessly, "I've told you, he's not your father." "You're lying, he is my daddy." "Why do you say he's your daddy?" Lilywood put her small hand under her chin and looked up, thinking for a moment, "It's a feeling." Rosewood was truly at a loss with the little girl. She gently pinched Lilywood's nose, not too hard, with deep affection. "You little rascal, you're the only clever one." As the mother and daughter were sharing a tender moment, the butler approached and said, "Miss Wood, I'll have someone drive you to collect your luggage." Rosewood stood up and said, "Yes, thank you." The driver took the two of them back to Violet Evans' house. "Are you planning to live with Ethan Miller? And be his fiancée too?" Violet Evans was so shocked by the news that her jaw almost dropped. "Sure. Keep your voice down," Rosewood whispered. "I told you it's fake. I don't even understand what he's thinking." Violet Evans gave a mischievous smile, and Rosewood knew from that look that she had no good intentions. "Don't get any ideas, we've agreed to just live in the same house without interfering in each other's lives." Violet Evans raised an eyebrow, making a sound of understanding with a hint of teasing. Rosewood knew it was useless to explain further, so she didn't bother paying attention to her anymore. She quickly packed her things and headed for the door. As she was about to leave, Violet Evans hugged her tightly. "I'm going to miss you so much. It's not like we won't see each other again." Although she said that, she felt a deep attachment. Since before Lily was born, she had lived with Violet Evans for so many years, they had become very familiar with each other. Violet Evans pouted, "You're so heartless." "Fine, go on then." Rosewood put on a serious face and advised, "Don't stay up late, remember to eat 3 meals a day." "You're so naggy." Rosewood shook her head helplessly and left her house. Chapter 14, Living Together, Heavy Pressure. "Miss Wood, this is your room," the butler said as he opened the door for Rosewood. "Thank you." Rosewood looked at the bright and comfortable room and carried her luggage inside. Lilywood followed closely behind, looking very happy. "If you need anything, just let me know, and I'll have someone get it for you." "No need, this is already great." "All right, I'll go back to work now." "When it's lunchtime, I'll have someone call you," the butler said, turning to leave. Suddenly, he turned back and added, "Oh, by the way, Miss Wood, the room next door is the young master's study, and the one next to that is his bedroom. The young master doesn't like others touching his things, so please." Before he could finish, Rosewood quickly assured him, "I understand, don't worry, I won't step into his study or bedroom." The butler nodded and left the room. Rosewood opened her suitcase and began unpacking. Lilywood chirped beside her, "Mom, are we going to live here from now on? With Dad?" Rosewood continued unpacking swiftly and replied, "Yes, we'll live here, but let me remind you again, he's not your dad." However, her last words were clearly ignored by Lilywood. Lilywood ran around joyfully, "Great! We can see Dad every day now." Rosewood felt dizzy from her daughter's excitement. But thinking about it, being here does make it easier to meet Ethan Miller. She must quickly find a way to get him to agree to treat Lily. At lunchtime, the maid called Rosewood downstairs to eat. Rosewood glanced at Lily, who was sound asleep on the bed, and felt like giving her a playful smack. Since arriving, the girl had been following her around, chattering non-stop, and finally fell asleep exhausted just a few minutes ago. She gently closed the door and followed the maid downstairs. Ethan Miller was sitting leisurely at the dining table and signaled for her to come closer as soon as he saw her. The maid pulled out a chair, and Rosewood thanked her before sitting down across from him. Ethan Miller glanced at her and said, "Join me for the celebration party tonight." "Celebration party?" He gave a slight nod, not intending to explain further. Rosewood didn't ask anything more. She figured she should just follow his lead. After the brief conversation, the dining room became quiet again, suddenly interrupted by the sound of a stomach growling. Ethan Miller looked over at Rosewood, noticing her flushed cheeks. She lowered her head and shyly said, "I haven't eaten anything this morning." He continued to stare at her, making her want to disappear. After a moment, she took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and picked up her chopsticks. "I'll eat now," she said. Then she began to eat. Ethan Miller withdrew his gaze and calmly picked up his chopsticks, his posture impeccable as he took some food. Coincidentally, their chopsticks touched the same piece of food. Ethan Miller pulled his chopsticks back. Rosewood was taken aback, then said, "You should have it." She picked up the piece of food and placed it in Ethan Miller's bowl. He looked down at the food in his bowl and pushed it aside. Seeing this, Rosewood pressed her lips together, no longer looking at him, and focused on her own meal. "I'm full, take your time." She quickly finished eating and stood up to take her dishes to the kitchen, but the maid stopped her. "Miss Wood, please allow me to handle that." Rosewood, unaccustomed to being waited on, said, "I can do it myself." The maid cautiously glanced at Ethan Miller. Chapter 15, was he planning to kiss her? Ethan Miller put down his chopsticks, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and stood up, telling the maid, "If she wants to do it, let her." With that, he turned and left the dining room. Seeing him go upstairs, Rosewood picked up the bowl and chopsticks and went into the kitchen. The maid followed her, and as Rosewood washed the dishes, she asked, "Does Mr. Miller come home for lunch every day?" The maid shook her head. "The young master doesn't have a fixed schedule for meals." Rosewood nodded, hesitated for a moment, then said, "Could I use the kitchen a bit later? My daughter is still sleeping, and she'll definitely be hungry when she wakes up. I want to cook something for her. I've already prepared food for the little girl." "Oh? Really, thank you. Miss Wood, there's no need to be so polite. It's our duty." After washing the dishes, Rosewood went upstairs. As she passed Ethan Miller's study, the man happened to open the door and step out. Seeing him, she stopped. "Mr. Miller." Ethan Miller glanced at her but didn't respond to her greeting, walking past her indifferently. Irritated by his arrogant and rude attitude, she immediately turned around and called out, "Wait a moment." He stopped but didn't turn around. Rosewood stepped in front of him, raising her voice to lecture, "When someone greets you, you should at least acknowledge them. Don't you find your attitude excessively rude?" Hearing this, Ethan Miller's eyes darkened. This woman dared to lecture him? He stared at her, moving closer, his sharp gaze making her shiver involuntarily. As he got closer, she hurriedly stepped back, placing her hands on his chest. "What do you want?" "Don't come near me." He unexpectedly grabbed her wrist, pulling her slightly into his embrace. Startled, she exclaimed, "You're being a rogue. Didn't you say you weren't interested in me?" As soon as she finished speaking, his unfamiliar masculine breath brushed against her face. Ethan Miller leaned close to her ear, teasingly saying, "Did I say I wanted to do anything to you? Then why are you getting so close to me?" Rosewood, both embarrassed and angry, looked up, meeting his deep, night-like eyes. He suddenly lifted her chin, holding her lips firmly, a mischievous smile playing at his lips as he gradually leaned in. Rosewood's whole body stiffened, her heart pounding. Was he planning to kiss her? Just as their lips were about to touch, Rosewood intended to push Ethan Miller away, but he stepped back on his own, maintaining a distance from her. "Huh? Rosewood looked at Ethan Miller in confusion, noticing a teasing glint in his eyes, which made her face flush with anger. She said, "Mr. Miller, has any woman ever told you that you're very annoying?" Ethan Miller sneered disdainfully. "They wouldn't dare say that. Moreover, few women could get close to him." Rosewood continued, "Then you really should take a look at yourself. I think the women around you must have to put up with your awful personality." "The women around me?" He raised an eyebrow and replied coldly, "Who told you I have many women?" From the beginning to the end, the only woman who had been in his bed was that damned one 5 years ago. She dared to take advantage of his dazed state, spend a night with him, and then quietly disappear. He vowed to find her and make her pay. "You yourself said you have no shortage of women. Didn't that imply he had plenty?" Ethan Miller did not elaborate further on this matter. He indeed had no shortage of women, but that didn't mean he would accept just anyone clinging to him. Chapter 16, "This gown suits you well. Tonight at 7, I'll have someone take you to the celebration party," Ethan Miller said, his eyes scanning her from top to bottom. "You need to wear an evening gown." Rosewood felt a bit uncomfortable under his gaze. "I know." After he left, Rosewood immediately returned to the bedroom. In the bedroom, Lilywood had just woken up, rubbing her big, sparkling eyes. "Mom, I'm so tired." Rosewood sat by the bed, gently stroking her daughter's hair, feeling both angry and tender. "Who told you to run around for so long?" At this, Rosewood's eyes darkened. Lily wasn't like other children. She didn't have a healthy heart and got tired easily, unable to engage in strenuous activities. Rosewood held her daughter close, asking gently, "Are you hungry? Shall I take you to eat?" "Yes, I'm very hungry." Rosewood carried her daughter downstairs and fed her. After eating, Lilywood happily ran out to the yard, looking at the vast space, several times bigger than a football field. She pointed to a distant greenhouse and said, "Mom, I want to play there." Well, after all, they were just guests here. Although Ethan Miller didn't forbid them from moving around freely, this place wasn't their home. Rosewood hesitated a bit. Lily, though sometimes a bit stubborn, was very understanding. Seeing her mother's hesitation, she said, "Mom, I won't go to the greenhouse. Let's just sunbathe in the yard." Rosewood smiled and took her for a walk around the estate. "Miss Wood, here are a few evening gowns for you to choose from," the butler said, standing in front of 4 maids, each holding a gown. Rosewood glanced over each dress and casually picked a soft pink one. "I'll take this one." "Very well. Please proceed to the dressing room, and I'll have the driver take you to the Golden Flower Hotel." Rosewood took the gown and went into the dressing room. Shortly after, she emerged with blushing cheeks, her hand covering her chest, hesitantly asking, "Is this a bit too revealing?" She had never worn anything so low-cut before. The maids looked at her in surprise, then sincerely complimented her, "Miss Wood, you look beautiful, this gown suits you perfectly." "Thank you," she replied shyly. The butler reminded her, "Time is running short, Miss Wood, we should be leaving." Rosewood glanced at Lilywood playing in the first-floor hall and instructed with concern, "Please take care of Lily for me." Fortunately, she had prepared Lily earlier, and the girl agreed to her attending the celebration party with Ethan Miller. Before leaving, Lilywood stood at the door, waving at Rosewood, "Mom, come back soon with Dad." Rosewood was now calm about her daughter calling Ethan Miller Dad. "Okay," she softly replied, then turned to get into the car. Golden Flower Hotel. Rosewood stepped out of the car, escorted by a bodyguard to find Ethan Miller. At that moment, he was standing outside the banquet hall, conversing with a man and a woman. He held a glass of wine, a faint smile on his face, exuding a calm and experienced demeanor. "Mr. Miller, Miss Wood has arrived," the bodyguard said, bringing Rosewood to his side. He turned his head and was momentarily taken aback upon seeing Rosewood. His gaze swept over her slender figure, finally resting on her chest, causing him to frown slightly. "Who is this young lady?" his companion asked curiously. He pulled her closer, wrapping an arm around her waist, and said, "My fiancée." Chapter 17, An Unexpected Reunion. Rosewood paused, trying to suppress the urge to push him away, and politely introduced herself. After exchanging a few pleasantries, everyone proceeded into the auditorium. Rosewood walked beside Ethan Miller, his arm around her waist. Their entrance immediately drew the attention of everyone in the room. Feeling the countless gazes upon her, Rosewood suddenly felt a bit uneasy. Ethan Miller looked at her and whispered just loud enough for both of them to hear, "Don't forget your role right now." "I know," she replied, relaxing her grip on her dress, taking a deep breath, and calmly surveying the hall. Today was the celebration for the film Smile, which had achieved a record-breaking box office of $30 billion. Therefore, most attendees were famous actors, directors, and screenwriters, alongside executives from investment companies and partnering cinemas. Seeing faces she usually only saw on TV, Rosewood found it intriguing. At that moment, Ethan Miller released her and walked away. As soon as he left, Rosewood breathed a sigh of relief. There was no denying the man's commanding presence. "Rosewood." Just as she relaxed, she heard someone call her name. Almost immediately, she recognized the voice. Her back stiffened. Slowly turning around, she met his gaze. Adam Green. His appearance hadn't changed much. Compared to his previous carefree demeanor, he now seemed more mature and composed, yet still striking and charismatic. Even in a crowd, he easily drew everyone's attention. Thinking back, it had been years since they last met, ever since she had left S Country with Lily and Violet Evans. She hadn't seen him since. However, she often saw him on TV. It was said that he was now an international superstar with an unshakable status. She knew this had always been his dream, and now that it had come true, she should be happy for him. "I can't believe it's really you," he said, his voice slightly emotional, though she wasn't sure if she had imagined it. She simply nodded, not saying anything more. "You and Ethan Miller," he began, then stopped, seemingly waiting for her to continue. Rosewood glanced at him and quickly turned away. "I belong to him." She had tried very hard, but the words fiancé still lacked the courage to be spoken in front of him. "Rosewood." At that moment, a woman in a white dress approached, intimately linking arms with Adam Green, holding his hand with a fake smile. She looked at Rosewood and said, "Long time no see." Rosewood didn't pay attention to their intimate gesture, forcing a smile. "Long time no see, Catherine." Yes, Catherine Hall, her best friend, and also Adam Green's lover. Catherine Hall laughed and said, "When you and Violet Evans went to Country A, I always felt very guilty. After all, Adam and I being together must have been a big shock for you." Catherine. Adam Green looked at her, his expression slightly dark. "The past is the past, let's not bring it up again." Catherine Hall laughed coldly, then turned to Rosewood, her tone provocative. "Anyway, we're old classmates, it's been so long since we've met, chatting about the old days shouldn't be a problem, right? Or is Rosewood still upset about those things? Adam Green was clearly displeased, removing Catherine Hall's hand from his, and turned to look at Rosewood. Rosewood interrupted him. It's okay. She smiled gracefully, her delicate features becoming even more radiant, exuding a charm mixed with elegance. Chapter 18, Mr. Miller's fiery enthusiasm. Adam Green was momentarily stunned. Catherine Hall gritted her teeth, speaking languidly. I told you, Rosewood has long forgotten. Rosewood maintained her smile, contemplating whether to find an excuse to leave, as she really didn't want to see Catherine Hall at the moment. Catherine Hall continued, seemingly speaking deliberately for Adam Green to hear. Anyway, she's now Ethan Miller's woman. Rosewood looked at the two of them, slightly puffing out her chest. That's right, I am Ethan Miller's fiancée. With that, she ran her hand through her sleek black hair, her face showing the happiness of a petite woman, a simple gesture that made her even more alluring. Adam Green and Catherine Hall were both taken aback by her words. Although rumors about Ethan Miller and Rosewood have been spreading everywhere for the past 2 days, everyone speculates that Rosewood is one of Ethan Miller's lovers, but there has never been any accurate news stating that Rosewood is his fiancée. The romantic waltz melody fills the ballroom, with several couples already dancing on the floor. Ethan Miller finishes his conversation with the famous director and turns to see Rosewood talking to a man and a woman, his curiosity piqued. Is there someone she knows here? It seems he underestimated this woman. He approaches elegantly, quietly coming up behind Rosewood. Adam Green and Catherine Hall, facing Rosewood, both notice Ethan Miller approaching. They suddenly fall silent. Rosewood remains unaware of the man drawing near, still speaking, I am very happy now. Although Ethan Miller appears cold on the outside, he is actually very passionate. I feel honored to be his wife in the future. As soon as she finishes speaking, a hand suddenly wraps around her waist. Startled, she turns to meet the deep, smiling eyes of the man. Miller! She exclaims in surprise, her face flushing with embarrassment at being caught. She intended to call him Mr. Miller, but decided against it, considering Adam Green and Catherine Hall were present. Ethan Miller takes her delicate hand, placing it on his lips with courtesy, gently kissing the back of her hand, then looks up at her and asks, So, my future wife, may I have the honor of inviting you to dance? Rosewood's heart races. Ethan Miller, already strikingly handsome, now smiles gently, making her feel dazzled. Her face turns crimson with nervousness, almost unable to speak, she can only nod. Ethan Miller leads her to the dance floor, leaving Adam Green and Catherine Hall standing bewildered. Catherine Hall watches their retreating figures, her expression full of envy. In the middle of the dance floor, Rosewood lowers her head, unable to meet Ethan Miller's gaze. So embarrassing. Why did I say such things, and let Ethan Miller hear them too? She hopes he doesn't misunderstand. Do I look that bad? Ethan Miller's deep, warm voice echoed above her head. Huh? Rosewood looked up, puzzled at him, not understanding why he suddenly said such a thing. If he were unattractive, then what would the other men here be? She really wanted to say, President Miller, stop joking. I thought you would keep your head down forever, he teased slightly. Rosewood glared at him and decided to speak frankly, the things I just said, none of them were true. He looked puzzled. What things? What did you say? You. This man was too much. She couldn't believe he didn't know what she was talking about. Chapter 19, The gown gets torn. You mean, you think I appear cold on the outside but am actually passionate like fire, and you feel that being my wife would be an honor? He remembered it all too well. Rosewood nodded. Please, Mr. Miller, don't take those words seriously. What if I do take them seriously? He countered. Take them seriously? How could such words be taken seriously? Those words weren't true to begin with. There's no need for Mr. Miller to take them seriously. Rosewood turned away, not wanting to look at him anymore, and ended up accidentally seeing Adam Green and Catherine Hall dancing on the floor. Adam Green's gaze was fixed on her without any concealment, which distracted her for a moment, causing her to accidentally step on Ethan Miller's foot. She quickly apologized. I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. The man's face immediately darkened, but he didn't argue with her and continued the previous topic. How do you know it's not real? Could it really be true? Rosewood couldn't possibly imagine the fiery enthusiasm of the man in front of her. Ethan Miller squinted, suddenly leaned down, and whispered in her ear, Do you think I'm not cold enough, or not fiery enough? His voice was deep and alluring, slightly husky, making her ears burn. Rosewood inexplicably felt a surge of electricity from the soles of her feet to the top of her head. The two danced on the floor in an ambiguously intimate manner, looking incredibly stunning. I. She stammered a few times, but couldn't find the words to respond. Tell the truth? Tell him she felt he wasn't passionate enough? Impossible. She immediately dismissed the thought. At that moment, the music abruptly stopped. A song had just ended, and a few people began to leave the dance floor. Naturally, some took the opportunity to chat, preparing for the next dance. Rosewood secretly breathed a sigh of relief and said, Let's go outside. She released Ethan Miller and turned to walk away. Unexpectedly, someone stepped on her evening gown. Since it had no shoulder straps, the already low-cut dress slipped down. Ah! Rosewood exclaimed in shock, lowering her head, intending to cover her exposed chest, but someone was quicker. He embraced her, shielding her with his body, and held the dress in place to prevent it from slipping further. She looked up and saw it was Ethan Miller. The man's face was now frighteningly stern, his arms tightly around her, his sharp gaze fixed on the person behind. Rosewood. Adam Green reacted quickly too, taking off his jacket and rushing over to drape it over her bare back. Rosewood felt everyone's eyes on her and quickly buried her face in Ethan Miller's chest. Just then, all the lights in the hall suddenly went out, plunging the surroundings into darkness. Rosewood clung tightly to Ethan Miller's shirt, biting her lip, her eyes slightly moist. When the lights came back on, the two were nowhere to be seen on the dance floor. Ethan Miller hurriedly carried Rosewood towards the changing room. Rose nestled obediently in his arms, discreetly wiping her tears on his shirt. Once they reached the changing room, Ethan set her down. She quickly grabbed a shirt to cover herself, looked up at him, and said, Mr. Miller, thank you. She thanked him first, then added, Could you please step outside for a moment? Ethan stared at her coldly. Under his scrutinizing gaze, she couldn't help but tremble slightly. What was wrong with this man? Clearly, she was the one bullied and embarrassed, yet she hadn't even had a chance to complain, and here he was looking at her with such a frightening expression. Chapter 20, The Softness. What's wrong? Rosewood clutched the edge of her shirt, her eyes avoiding his, not daring to meet Ethan Miller's gaze. His eyes traveled down her slender white neck and finally settled on her chest. Realizing where he was looking, Rose instinctively covered herself more tightly. Mr. Miller. She wanted to say, could he please not look at her so blatantly, it was making her overthink. He lifted her chin, his strong hand holding her firmly, preventing her from moving. Then he uttered 2 words. Softness. What? What was soft? She didn't understand the sudden words he said. He had to add another word, breasts. Hearing this, Rosewood blinked in confusion, as if trying to process his words. A few seconds later. Pervert. Stay away from me. She blushed, shouted, and pushed him away with both hands. The vest draped over her immediately fell open, fully exposing her upper body. She instinctively pulled her hand back to cover herself, but midway, it was halted. Ethan Miller unexpectedly grabbed her wrist, leaving her no way to shield her body. Her chest was completely exposed under the man's gaze. He stared intently at her chest, his eyes deep. Rosewood was so embarrassed she wanted to slap him, but her hand was tightly held, unable to break free. Mr. Miller, what you're doing seems different from what you said. What did I say? Oh my! Did he forget? Rosewood bit her lip gently, reminding him, you said you weren't interested in my body. If he wasn't interested, then what was he doing now? Hearing this, Ethan Miller suddenly released her, stood up, and said, just curious. Rosewood immediately turned her back and asked, curious about what? Curious about a woman's body? Don't tell her he's never seen a woman's body before. She would rather die than believe such a thing. Yet, she guessed right. Ethan Miller replied, curious about a woman's body. What? Rosewood was nearly jaw-dropped, turning sharply in surprise. Seeing her reaction, he immediately turned cold. When there's an opportunity later, I'll study it thoroughly. The prerequisite is that he must catch the woman from 5 years ago, then he will strip her under the light, meticulously, carefully studying her body and scent. Hearing this, Rosewood was completely dumbfounded. Study? Study what? Study a woman's body? Thinking that, she quickly stepped back, increasing the distance from Ethan Miller. This man, could it be that studying medicine has made him psychologically abnormal? She seemed to have heard before that people who study medicine, anatomy, or something like that don't view the human body as a human body. Ethan Miller noticed her constantly changing expression and guessed she was distracted, so he spoke up, fix your clothes and immediately return to the party, the celebration isn't over yet. Rosewood awoke suddenly, muttering, really, turning faster than flipping a book. What did you say? He asked coldly. Nothing, she replied, breaking into a cold sweat. I understand. The man let out a slight snort and turned to leave the dressing room. As soon as Ethan Miller left, Rosewood hurriedly took off her coat. Holding it in her hands, she looked down for a moment, thinking about Adam Green's gaze earlier, which made her feel uneasy and restless. Chapter 21, The Master Rogue. After taking off her coat, Rosewood quickly put on her evening gown again. Looking at herself in the mirror, she unconsciously glanced at her chest, recalling Ethan Miller's earlier remark, very soft. That damn rogue. Indeed, President Miller was cold and even his teasing was unique. She finally understood what it meant to tease seriously. But then, at that moment, to cover her chest, Ethan Miller had held her tightly, their bodies pressed closely together, allowing her to clearly feel his firm chest. Very hard. No wonder he found her soft. Ack, ack, ack. Rosewood, what nonsense are you thinking? Realizing she had been daydreaming, she quickly patted her flushed face, grabbed Adam Green's coat, and left the dressing room. In the hall, there was still wine, champagne, and gentle music, as if nothing had happened. However, wherever Rosewood went, she attracted scrutinizing glances, making her uncomfortable. "Ah! What are you doing? Do you even know how to work? Oh my dress! I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." The seemingly peaceful atmosphere was suddenly shattered by a piercing scream, followed by a barrage of scolding. Rosewood looked towards the screen and saw Catherine Hall angrily reprimanding a waiter. Her white dress was stained with splashes of red wine, not only on the dress but also across her chest. The waiter bowed his head, continuously apologizing. Catherine Hall was so furious that her face turned red, ignoring his apologies, and kept scolding him, even threatening to call the manager, dock his pay, and fire him. It wasn't until Adam Green stepped in and said, "All right, everyone's watching, go change your clothes," that Catherine Hall snorted and headed towards the dressing room. At this moment, Adam Green noticed Rosewood and quickly walked over to her. Seeing him approach, Rosewood waited for him to stand in front of her and handed back his jacket. "Here you go, thank you." Adam Green took the jacket, looked at her for a moment, and suddenly said, "It seems Ethan Miller is really protective of you." "Huh? Ethan Miller protective of her?" She truly didn't understand how Adam Green came to this conclusion. "When Catherine Hall stepped on your dress, he signaled the waiter to spill the entire tray of red wine on her. Isn't that being protective?" "What? Catherine Hall stepped on her dress?" At that moment, she was so nervous her mind went blank, thinking someone had accidentally stepped on it, not realizing Catherine Hall deliberately tried to embarrass her. However, what surprised her wasn't this. With Catherine Hall's petty and competitive nature, it wasn't unusual for her to play dirty. What shocked her was Adam Green saying Ethan Miller signaled the waiter to pour red wine on Catherine Hall. Would Ethan Miller stand up for her? How could that be? Instinctively, she turned to look for the man, and coincidentally, met his gaze. He looked at her with an unhappy expression, then glanced at Adam Green beside her, his handsome face growing more displeased. Rosewood inexplicably felt a bit guilty and quickly averted her eyes elsewhere. At this moment, Adam Green spoke up, "Rosewood, how about we go out for a meal sometime?" Faced with his invitation, Rosewood tactfully declined. "You know, the current situation between Catherine and me, she probably wouldn't calmly sit and eat with me." "Not with Catherine, just you and me." Rosewood widened her eyes, looking at Adam Green. Chapter 22, He dared to kiss her again. She once admired this face greatly. A few years ago, she dreamed of becoming his lover, even his wife. But now, everything had changed. "Now you are Catherine's lover, so it's best if we don't meet anymore," she said firmly, looking at him. "Moreover, I am now Ethan Miller's fiancée." She reminded him, but it felt more like she was reminding herself. Adam Green was momentarily taken aback. Although Rosewood's words were decisive, her heart was in turmoil. "Well then, Ethan Miller is waiting for me. I'll leave now." Without waiting for Adam Green to respond, she turned and walked towards Ethan Miller. Ethan Miller saw her approaching, ended his conversation with the person next to him, and asked with a blank expression, "An old acquaintance?" Was the conversation enjoyable? "Yes," she replied simply, not giving much thought to her answer. Ethan Miller repeated the question, "Was the conversation enjoyable?" "Huh?" Rosewood looked up, suddenly startled. The man's expression seemed not so pleasant. Not really, she wisely responded. Ethan Miller gave her a cold glance. I don't care what happened between you and him before, but currently, you must remember that you are my fiancée. His tone was extremely domineering, as if issuing an order to her. Rosewood gritted her teeth and said angrily, I know. Ethan Miller snorted softly, I'm tired, let's go back to the manor. Leave now? The party wasn't over yet, and he was a key figure. Leaving early, does that sound right? He narrowed his eyes, why? Do you want to stay here longer? Rosewood quickly shook her head, no, if you want to leave, then let's go. Anyway, she wanted to return early to be with Lily. But by the time she got home, Lily would probably be asleep. Ethan Miller turned coldly and left. Rosewood watched his arrogant back and suddenly thought, could it be that he really signaled the staff to handle Catherine Hall for her? In the car. Rosewood sat close to the car door, maintaining as much distance as possible from Ethan Miller. The atmosphere inside the car was extremely tense, and she could barely stop herself from trembling. If I remember correctly, you used to do everything you could to get close to me? Ethan Miller said, patting the seat next to him, his intentions clear without needing to be spoken. Rosewood hesitated for a few seconds, then moved closer to him. She said, Mr. Miller, I am seriously begging you. Please, save my daughter. Ethan Miller turned his head, his gaze seemingly fixed on her. Inside the car, there was only a dim light, under which her features appeared even more gentle, her slender figure draped in an evening gown. His eyes darkened. Seeing no reaction from him, Rosewood had to speak again, Mr. Miller, please think carefully, the longer Lily's illness is left untreated, the worse it will be for surgery. Faced with her pitiful plea, he suddenly pulled her closer, and without a word, lowered his head to capture her sweet, soft lips in a passionate kiss. Rosewood widened her eyes, stunned for 2 seconds, then immediately raised her hands to resist, but he firmly restrained her. His kiss was domineering, not allowing her to resist, yet not cold as his exterior suggested. On the contrary, it was intensely passionate. A long time passed before he finally released her, leaving her limp against him. Just as she was about to demand fairness for herself, she heard him ask, was I passionate enough? Oh my! He actually remembered what she had just said. She lifted her head from his embrace, straightened the dress he had wrinkled, and sarcastically remarked, Mr. Miller, you were excessively passionate. Chapter 23, Does Mom Want to Sleep with Dad? Thinking about how he had taken advantage of her several times, Rosewood reminded him, Mr. Miller, I am only your fiancée in name, so I hope you won't kiss me without reason again. Hearing her words, the man appeared contemplative, one hand resting casually on his thigh, fingers tapping lightly on his knee. Rosewood assumed he was reflecting on his actions and felt quite satisfied with this attitude. Unexpectedly, after a while, Ethan Miller asked, so, does that mean I can kiss you if there's a reason? Hearing that, Rosewood nearly froze in surprise. Was this the conclusion he reached after all that thinking? Is the legendary CEO Miller with an IQ over 200 really the man standing before her? Of course not. No matter the reason, you can't just kiss me. They weren't lovers, so how could he kiss her so casually? He stared at her, his gaze calm like water under the night sky. Okay. Just one word. Was that an agreement with what she said? Anyway, she had made herself clear, and surely Ethan Miller would comply. Arriving at the estate, Rosewood got out of the car with Ethan Miller. As soon as they stepped out, Lilywood came running from the main hall. "Dad, Mom. This little one, still not asleep?" Rosewood smiled and squatted down, expecting her daughter to rush into her arms. Instead, Lilywood ran past her and hugged Ethan Miller's leg tightly. "Dad." The man frowned, looking down at Lilywood, his voice irritated as he spoke to Rosewood. "Your daughter doesn't even know who her father is?" Rosewood, embarrassed, stepped forward to pick Lilywood up. "She doesn't know." "Oh?" Ethan Miller drew out the word, full of implication. He knew she wasn't married but had a daughter this big, and clearly, the girl didn't know who her father was. Rosewood wasn't sure how to explain to him. In truth, she didn't feel she needed to. "Lily, come here, he's not your father." Lilywood clung to Ethan Miller, refusing to let go, and looked up to ask, "Dad, is Mom beautiful today? Did any man keep staring and talking to her?" Hearing this, Ethan Miller glanced at Rosewood from head to toe. His gaze felt like a caress, making Rosewood want to disappear. Lilywood proudly declared, "Back in Country A, I helped Dad chase away all the annoying men who tried to approach Mom." "Dad, is there a reward?" Lily would. Rosewood gritted her teeth, lifting her daughter up. This little traitor. She had known Ethan Miller for less than 24 hours and was already closer to him than her own mother. How could she swallow this anger? "It's late, go upstairs and sleep. No more talking." Rosewood completely lost her gentle demeanor, carrying her daughter away. Lilywood kept calling out to Ethan Miller, "Dad, Dad." She looked as if she was about to be separated from her father by some villain. Rosewood gently patted her daughter's bottom. Returning to the bedroom, Rosewood bathed Lilywood, dressed her in pajamas, and carried her to bed. "Sleep well." Lilywood hugged her pillow, her eyes sparkling as she looked at her. "Mom, is Dad sleeping with us?" "Your dad is sleeping in another room." Faced with Rosewood's stern expression and harsh tone, Lilywood wasn't scared at all. "Mom, do you want to sleep with Dad?" Chapter 24, Daddy. Her daughter, was she too perceptive? "No, you're sleeping with me." "What about Dad?" Rosewood kept a straight face. "Stop talking about it. He's a grown man, he can sleep by himself." Lilywood pulled the blanket over her head. "I can sleep by myself too, so Mom, you should go sleep with Dad." Rosewood was about to explode with frustration. Sleep with Ethan Miller? What a joke! She wasn't his wife. "Go to sleep, don't say another word," she reminded, then stood up to find her pajamas and headed into the bathroom. After showering and drying her hair, Rosewood stretched as she walked out of the bathroom. When she reached the bed, she noticed Lilywood was gone. "Lily," she called out, quickly leaving the bedroom. Even though she knew her daughter wouldn't get lost here, she still felt a bit anxious. "Daddy, why don't you sleep with me and Mommy?" Rosewood was standing in the hallway on the second floor, looking down at the first floor lobby when she suddenly heard Lilywood's little voice. Following the sound, she saw Lilywood standing in front of Ethan Miller's bedroom door. Ethan Miller was looking down, and Lilywood was looking up, the two of them, gazing at each other. "This child." Rosewood hurried over, immediately apologizing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller, for disturbing you. I'll take her away right now." After apologizing, she squatted down and spoke to Lilywood with resignation. "Didn't I tell you to go to sleep? Come back to the room with me." Lilywood looked at Ethan Miller, "But Dad." Before she could finish her sentence, Rosewood hurriedly covered the little girl's mouth and glared, "Behave." Lilywood puffed her cheeks in a pout, her eyes sparkling as she looked at Rosewood, causing her to soften and release her hand. In the next moment, Lilywood uttered a sentence that left everyone astonished. "Daddy, Mommy's chest is much bigger than Aunt Yen's." Rosewood. Ethan Miller's face darkened. Instinctively, Rosewood glanced down at her chest, then quickly covered it with her hands. She had completely forgotten that she was wearing sleepwear after just taking a bath, preparing for bed. The silk nightgown was thin and, most importantly, transparent. A spaghetti strap top with a deep neckline. It didn't cover anything, and she wasn't wearing any underwear. So just bending down revealed everything. Rosewood quickly stood up and, upon looking up, saw the intense gaze of the man staring at her, her face turning crimson. Ethan Miller's voice held a hint of anger. "Don't dress like that and wander around in the future." She looked at his cold expression, feeling utterly perplexed. Clearly, she was the one at a disadvantage, and she hadn't even gotten angry with him, yet he was blaming her first. Rosewood refused to back down. "I hope Mr. Miller can control his eyes and not look around randomly in the future." Hearing this, the man's eyes narrowed dangerously. Rosewood instinctively took a step back, then hurriedly pulled Lilywood back to the bedroom. Ethan Miller stared intently at her slender back. Rosewood locked the door and breathed a sigh of relief. She lifted Lilywood onto the bed, and the two of them lay down together. "You little rascal, why don't you ever listen? I've told you so many times, that man is not your father. Why do you keep calling him Dad?" Lilywood innocently lifted her small face. "But I feel like he's my dad." "That's just your feeling." Chapter 25, Become My Woman. Ethan Miller. Early in the morning, Rosewood dressed neatly, guiding the lively Lilywood downstairs. The atmosphere in the main hall was somewhat strange. Mrs. Celeste sat elegantly on the sofa, with 4 expressionless bodyguards behind her. On the coffee table in front of her was a newspaper. Opposite, Ethan Miller was sipping his morning tea. Rosewood paused, uncertain whether to approach. Ethan Miller looked her way and gestured, "Come here." Lilywood let go of Rosewood's hand and ran to Ethan Miller's side. "Daddy." The most surprising thing happened. Ethan Miller did not push Lilywood away but nodded in response. Lilywood joyfully nestled into his chest, repeatedly calling, "Daddy, Daddy." "Ethan, you're being reckless," Mrs. Celeste said angrily. If she hadn't been taught strict manners from a young age, she might have slammed the table and stood up. Ethan Miller stood up, holding Lilywood's hand with one hand and wrapping an arm around Rosewood's waist, introducing her to Mrs. Celeste. "Mother, I didn't get to introduce her at the engagement party last time. This is my fiancée, Rosewood." "Mother?" Rosewood looked towards Mrs. Celeste. So she was Ethan Miller's mother. She quickly greeted politely, "Hello, ma'am. I'm Rosewood." Mrs. Celeste glanced at Rosewood with disdain, her arrogance evident in her demeanor. Rosewood uneasily nestled in Ethan Miller's arms, vaguely feeling as if she was being drawn into a vortex she shouldn't be involved in. Mrs. Celeste stood up slowly, her movements exuding a noble grace, superior to others. "You should know, with your status, you cannot marry this type of woman," Mrs. Celeste said, glancing at Rosewood. "She has given birth. She is entirely unqualified to be your wife." Rosewood was angered by Mrs. Celeste's contemptuous tone, clenching her hands, trying to suppress her anger but couldn't hold back. She said, "Madam, you're right. I have indeed given birth. I am a mother, and I believe it was the best decision of my life." You are also a mother, so I think you would understand my feelings." Mrs. Celeste shouted in response, "Silence, what right do you have to speak to me?" Ethan Miller suddenly tightened his embrace, a simple gesture that warmed Rosewood's heart. She turned to look at the man holding her and saw him staring at Mrs. Celeste with a sharp gaze. "As long as she is my fiancée, she is qualified to be the future mistress of the Miller family." "Wishful thinking," Mrs. Celeste retorted harshly, "she will never set foot in our house." "Not only do I disagree, but your grandparents will never accept it either." Hearing this, Rosewood thought to herself, "Please, I don't want to marry into your family, I just want to save my daughter." Ethan Miller maintained his expression and said, "I will make her the mistress of the Miller family, my woman." Hearing his final words, Rosewood involuntarily shivered. To become his woman. Even though she knew it was just an act, a facade, when he spoke those words so confidently in front of her, she couldn't help but be shaken. Mrs. Celeste's expression grew even more unpleasant. "In a few days, it's the old master's birthday. You must come back to Min City with me." Ethan Miller responded decisively, "I will bring my fiancé along." Chapter 26, A Call from the Foster Mother. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Celeste snorted coldly and left in anger. Four bodyguards quickly followed her, and once they were gone, the hall became empty. As soon as Mrs. Celeste left, Ethan Miller released Rosewood and Lilywood. He then instructed someone to prepare a car, intending to go out. Rosewood touched her nose, knowing she was being used by Ethan Miller. Taking this opportunity, she quickly negotiated with him, "I will follow the agreement and cooperate with you obediently. Therefore, I hope you will consider Lily's surgery soon." Ethan Miller listened, glanced at her, and at that moment, a car came around from the backyard to the front. The bodyguard opened the car door, standing respectfully beside it, waiting for him to get in. Without saying another word, the man took long strides out of the house. Rosewood watched the car disappear before withdrawing her gaze. "Miss Wood, please have breakfast," a voice invited. Rosewood nodded and led Lilywood to the dining room, picking up a newspaper from the coffee table on her way. As expected, the entertainment news this morning was still about her and Ethan Miller. Last night, after attending the celebration party together, her status as Ethan Miller's fiancée was confirmed. After breakfast, Rosewood stood in the yard, absent-mindedly watching Lilywood play. She was considering finding a job. Since returning from Country A, Lily had fainted and was hospitalized, and then, for some reason, they moved here. Although they didn't have to worry about food and clothing here, after the summer vacation, Lily would need to find a school to enroll in, which would involve many expenses. Lost in thought, the phone in her pocket suddenly rang. Rosewood took it out and saw it was an unknown number. "Hello?" On the other end came the voice of a middle-aged woman. "Is this Rosewood?" "It's your mother." Hearing this voice, Rosewood was stunned for a moment, then felt a pang of bitterness. After hesitating for a moment, she spoke with difficulty, "Mother." The mother Rosewood referred to was her foster mother, Jade Lewis. Since her foster father passed away, she and Jade Lewis had barely met, and her foster mother even prevented her sister from seeing her. She thought their relationship was over, yet her foster mother had reached out to her. This made her feel very strange. Jade Lewis asked, "Rosewood, are you free today?" Jade Lewis's tone was gentle, unlike her usual sarcastic, sharp manner. Rosewood replied blankly, "Yes, I'm free." Jade Lewis laughed, her voice warm. "You know, your sister has been talking about you for years." If you're free, come home for dinner." Hearing this, Rosewood was so surprised she couldn't speak. The person who had driven her out was now inviting her back for a meal? "What's wrong? Are you not free?" "It's okay, just let me know when you are, and I'll make your favorite dishes," Jade Lewis said, sounding anxious, as if afraid she wouldn't come back. Even though she had long been disappointed in her, Rosewood still cared about Tessa Wood. After thinking for a moment, she agreed, "I'll come right away." Jade Lewis was delighted to hear this, repeatedly saying, "Good, good. We'll be waiting for you at home." Ending the call, Rosewood looked at Lily Wood and waved her over. Lily ran over cheerfully. "Mom, what's up?" "I have to go out for a bit, stay at the estate, okay? If you need anything, just ask the maids and the butler." Lily's eyes widened with curiosity. "Where are you going, Mom?" Rosewood knelt down and lightly tapped her daughter's forehead. "I have some errands, it's not convenient to take you along. Be a good girl and practice your piano, no slacking off." Lily pouted. "I know. You talk too much. Without me, be careful not to get bullied by anyone bad." Hey, she's still her mother, isn't she?" Being reminded like that by her child was quite embarrassing. Rosewood reluctantly said, "Mom, I know." Chapter 27, the plot years had passed, and she thought she'd never have the chance to return to this place again. Yet, at this moment, Rosewood looked up, gazing at the apartment complex filled with countless memories, her heart overflowing with emotions. As she reminisced, she walked to the front door, staring at it for a long time before finally reaching out to press the doorbell. Ding dong, ding dong. As soon as the doorbell rang twice, the door swung open.